He just believe was the last vehicle of this last barracks, so he should be here.
Do you know if there are special privileges?
Well, it's back a little bit. You know, look at it. Maybe.
Well, what we're gonna do is, we got a bunch of jobs.
Yeah, well. It's gonna be something, something fun.
That'll be number 3.
I never think that.
All the extra days to get all this business. set
Yeah.
up.
I came back here on Sunday and spent like an hour just kind of messing around with it.
Well, that's what
That and TV actually is a Roku TV that they have in your church.
you need it.
So that made it all like immediately easier. You can just air stream from.
Well, I'm gonna wait
Yeah.
for you.
Or whatever, yeah. And then we noticed.
I think I seen it driving.
It's supposed to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it all makes sense kind of. I'm sure we'll have to switch out.
Yeah, but like,
20 minutes will be like
All fire districts are.
No, we can't.
Good, that's big, so.
Yeah.
Well, ran into
So,
one of our fire
it's
districts.
recorded, so we get those down and all that stuff.
We got over.
Didn't used to have.
I know, Dean, we got fires. Are we gonna have this?
Mary said she couldn't hear it. So it's all up to y'all. I mean, we can turn it off. He probably warmed up.
How are people doing? I find it distracting, but I'm.
Yeah, we can turn it off.
Turn it off.
Where do you do that?
If you just press the down arrow until it gets down below, 5.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's right in your ear.
Yeah. Yeah, and then if it gets real cold in here.
Still a bit.
I know.
Okay, so
It's ridiculous.
please keep it at 40.
Just like.
My asparagus is just sitting there going,
Did you hear the thing about East Side farmers?
um,
All of us.
yeah, did it freeze?
Yeah.
I caught that late and they cut it.
And they have to, yeah.
Probably.
Sidewalk. And there he is.
Asparagus.
Waiting for you.
Should we all rise?
So we're gonna have to rise in a minute. Well, welcome everybody. The first in-person meeting and everybody in the audience as well. I understand that not too many other county committees are in person. But we're so eager, so eager.
Dedicated.
So we'll call this meeting to order at whatever time it is, 6:07. We'll start with the roll call. And I'll go backwards from Mike, who's here. Todd Lexi.
Yes.
Rich Fry. Jim Dickinson.
Yes.
Reed Johnson. Judy Olson. Chris Colburn. All here. And we're bringing back a tradition that we have suspended for the last 2 years. We have pledged allegiance. And we have start with that. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just because it was an added tradition that Lorena had to have a moment of silence, I'd like to follow the pledge with a moment of silence. As she would say, so we can bring our best to you. So, our first agenda item for today, and we're just a comment that we're trying to figure this out a little bit with the Zoom process and remote participation. We do have an open session for public comment. We moved that to the beginning of the meeting so that people who may have something to bring to the committee can do it without having to spend more time than they wish. And we did have the kind of casual consensus to have in-person attendees go first. We don't have any non-committee members unless Bill's already got a couple of roles here. So does anybody participating remotely have the comments they want to share with the committee?
You got,
Is that Dave Parker?
Yes. I'd like to make a brief comment about the decision to move the comments to the beginning of the meeting. This is, of course, a common practice with local governing bodies. But in most of those instances, there are action items appended to the agenda upon which the public can comment before it goes to the committee for discussion and a vote. But this committee is a little different. It's an advisory committee. And at least in my view, the things that are really worth commenting on or asking questions about are the reports from Roland and from Rich about ferry operations, ferry replacement, terminal renovations, and those kinds of things. And so I'm finding it a little awkward compared to when the comments could have come at the end of the meeting. As it stands now, if I want to comment on something that Roland says here, I'm going to have to wait a month, presumably, to make that comment at the beginning of the meeting. And that just doesn't seem timely to me. So I guess I'd ask that you maybe rethink this decision or consider the possibility that after the public works presentations are complete, that you could open it up for comments or questions from the public rather than restricting it to the first few minutes of the meeting. That's my comment.
Well, thanks. In our, we're kind of, I guess, if others want to respond, my initial response, Dave, is simply that in the past, in our in-person format, that really supported I felt it was a pretty good give and take through the meeting with, presentations, and there's a pretty active participation. So we're kind of feeling our way into how to do this in a hybrid mode, but I don't think it has to preclude participation as long as we're keeping up with a schedule. And that's one main concern. The other aspect is sometimes having the public comments at the end. I know that I heard from people who had the feeling that they were getting short shrift because now we're pushing 2 hours, and we honestly I don't think we can run meetings that long, at least not very often. So let's others comment from the committee.
Dave, I just put out to you that the county is very responsive. If you felt like something was really urgent, you can contact them through email or phone for that matter. So that option is there outside of the committee.
But he was kind of talking about, go, Todd.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to have, especially if we have the time and the bandwidth, to have public comment at the beginning and at the end. The PUD does that. And it allows the public to comment at the beginning for, I guess for the committee or for whoever to take into consideration. And then at the end, if there are questions or comments about any presentations. But they also limit the time period, right? We don't limit our time for people to really talk too much. So maybe that would be a fair trade-off, is to go to just an idea.
Well, and we have made an effort to allow time for agenda items so that we kind of stick to a schedule. So
One of the things I was going to suggest that in next month that we consider is the ability to have remote participants chat while you guys are doing your discussions. And while they don't interrupt and hear, it works really well for just asking one little question, like Rich was talking about something, and then, the audience, well, we don't want to have everybody jumping in, Mary has this question, and we could control it. We could, without it becoming, everybody's speaking all the time. So it's something to be considered, but it's all about improvement of participation.
yeah, well, so I guess from my point of view, we're gonna keep working on it, Dave. And for today, I just like to explore whether we have the time to agenda item by agenda item allow for participation questions from remote participants as well as in person. My main concern is the time issue has really expanded, and at least for myself and for some other committee members, we have had the feeling that we need to reel that in some. So your point is well taken, and if you can bear with us for a couple meetings, I think we'll try to accommodate that. I'm not sure we're ever going to get to the point where, like some of the county council stuff does, which has staff support, tech support, to do really high level remote participation, but the point isn't to exclude participation. It's just to manage the meeting flow. So anything else on that?
One that I was thinking was that perhaps periods should be done after each topic, and but with one person having one pass it. Even though a lot of times in the past we've had let people talk and things like it. It really does. I don't think it's been that terrible. That's my opinion.
Were there any other remote participants that wanted to contribute?
Number and the email address in the chat for them.
Okay. And also just to note that we've asked Bill we're kind of taking today's experience to try out, and Bill, next week, will kind of go a little deeper into the range of Zoom options that we can offer. Roman?
Just for the record, I gave Bill my card, so my direct phone line and email is going into the chat in case someone has a question. They're welcome to email me or call.
Oh, great, thank you. Well, let's see, the next agenda item is approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. Now, the internal business portion of today is I didn't do the greatest job of trying to write it out, but I tried to break out a couple of separate elements that I just think are useful to at least have some initial discussion about and get some ideas out, because this is the first meeting that we've had in person in 2 years. Over that 2 years, a lot has changed. A lot has changed in terms of not only the format, the remote format, but also the time footprint. We've had a change to the ferry schedule, and that those all kind of come together to influence how it seems like meetings will go. I think we have some folks' level of expectation is kind of a full-on hybrid, full participation available remotely, a little more in the model of what the county council is doing. And for us as a volunteer committee, that could be a fairly big lift. Today, we don't have we have few in-person attendees and few online attendees. But in the past, we've had over 20 remote participants, and we used to, sometimes we'd have 15, 20, even more at the in-person meetings. So I just feel that it's pretty important to at least bring up the subject. I don't see us making earth-shaking decisions about it, but and we each have individual perspectives. I have a perspective as an off-islander that I used to get here by 6:30. If I, in the summer, I'd allow for a couple of sailings. In the cooler part of the year, that wasn't so important, but here for the meeting at 6:30, we called to order pretty promptly, and I had to leave at 7:40 to make a 7:50 ferry. And so that was a 70-minute meeting, and often that, even though all y'all who live here might stick around and talk for another half hour or so, there was seldom a quorum. So at least from my perspective in a new role, it's I'm really looking at a start and end time so that the footprint of time and commitment doesn't grow too large. I also have to keep in mind that, so Todd Donovan isn't here today. He doesn't live out here. We really want him to attend as often as he can. And, Roland is also an off-islander. So I want to be sensitive to everybody's interests. I don't know what the best solution is, but I think it would be helpful to get us thinking about that, and maybe in a meeting or two be able to come back to it and say, okay, we're 6 to 7:30 is a long meeting in my view, especially if we've got a lot to get. I mean, we have a lot to get through, but that can be pretty long, especially with sailings. But that's my thoughts, and I really want to get others' thoughts so we can think about it together.
Is the ferry schedule still, remember pre-COVID?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's definitely different than it used to be.
Right,
There's
so-
there's a, it's on the hour from the island, it's a
Yeah.
clock facing schedule now, so.
right,
There's a 7, the schedule 7,
Seven.
8, 9, 10,
Yeah.
11, 12. We want to do something like.
And so missing the 8 sailing has a pretty big impact for anybody who can't
Yeah.
go.
yeah.
So it's no, so 2040.
in some ways, I actually like it better because it's predictable. I used to guess ferries. Oh, I'll catch the 9. I get there at 9, 12, 10, and it's like, it's
So
gone.
would you,
It's
did you
9
catch
o'clock.
your phone?
Mhm.
5:30.
Yeah, there's,
So, and that's a schedule.
Yes.
5:30 is a
what, there's
schedule.
a 5:10, 5:30.
5:50, at a 5:50, a 6:10, and a
6:10.
6:30.
And then it goes to the clock phase,
Yeah.
which is, I really appreciate that.
So if that's what's happening right now, it might be wise to just keep with the 6 o'clock, because you can get here not too early, and then you might have to wait a little bit for the 8, right? Right, versus changing that.
Yeah.
For now, that's what I would think would be appropriate. But I agree, it makes sense to make it as efficient as possible for the off-island people.
I think if it was later, then you'd run into missing that 8 o'clock ferry.
Yeah,
So we don't want that.
What, one thing is close. You know, you have to just run out the door.
keeping the 6, so that kind of implies the 6 to 7:30, so a 90-minute meeting.
Well, up to 90 minutes. I mean.
Well, or it could be up to an hour and 3/4, because it's still, you still got an 8
I guess
o'clock.
my point was, I'm not sure that it's beneficial to move back to a 6:30 based on the coming over.
And I'm not sure either, although there's another question which I doubt will be very popular, but that would be going to an earlier meeting. So you could meet, so returnees could make an earlier crossing.
Earlier than
Mathematically, you could do a 5:30 to 6:45 meeting and make a 7 o'clock.
because there's no ferries.
My guess is that we would end up always pushing that and getting to the later one anyways.
Well,
with the-
I won't.
Well,
And my family, this is, you know, the late, going late, it's I mean, there were times when we had to go. And I just need to take a break to call. But, you know, that's not necessarily what I'm advocating for, but if we stick with 6 to 7:30.
I think it's perfect.
If we did a 5:30, is that even attainable for everybody? Yeah.
my preference is, you know, I'm a firefighter, so I'm either off or I'm at the station, so it doesn't matter. So, but I prefer the 6 p.m. time that we have now.
Okay, well, if that's the consensus, we'll work with that. Let's see, the next point is really, you know, thinking about the Zoom format. This is something that I really don't know much about, and Bill and Mary have helped a huge amount to look at it, to see how things work. But it also seems like there's a pretty wide range of levels and options to offer. And so the main caution to me has been to, you know, what kind of a commitment or obligation do we make? And, you know, today, everything looks pretty simple. If we have 15 remote participants and another 10 or 12 in-person participants, it could get more complex. In our talking about ways to do this with Bill and Mary, we talked about as extensive a thing as having a specific position, a Zoom moderator, if that's a fair term. That's like a new position. it's new, it's more person requirements. And of course, if if somebody can't be here one time, I mean, we've kind of run into that a little bit. So that's an additional kind of obligation to be taken on. I just think it's better to be conscious about that than kind of letting it expand what I think of as a scope creep kind of approach. And so I don't think we have to necessarily make a decision, but I think we need to watch how it evolves and what we can try to do.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that keeping it as simple as possible is the wisest. I think that this scenario here is probably pretty good. To your comment, Bill, about setting up a chat for the folks that are online, I think, in my opinion, it's great for them to be chatting amongst themselves, but if we start to add an element where we are trying to consolidate chat opinions and then blend those into the meeting that's happening now, that's a mistake, that it will just complicate things. And I also feel like we have to be careful about setting precedents. And if we start creating expectations where people can get online, and have the expectation that they can express their opinions and take time, then that's something that I think we should watch out for.
So just to throw this in there, we can talk about it. But, in this post-COVID world, there are lots of organizations that find that the Zoom platform has many advantages. And in particular, people don't have to take the ferry over back, for example. It also means that those of us who have to drive somewhere don't have to drive here, drive back, or people. So it provides, from a climate change perspective, it's a lot less energy to be on. So there are advantages, and we'll just keep an eye on that for a while and see what people say.
Well, and we could have some kind of a schedule that has 1 month versus, well, that might get part of the way there. On the other end of that, I would just say, I at least personally have a real interest in having people attend in person.
But you do have a thought about that. In the pre-COVID days, we would occasionally go to town to have a meeting every so often to take the pressure off the people that came this direction. And we could consider having those meetings by Zoom.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Well,
Anyway.
I actually think that going to town is a good thing, personally.
Mhm.
And most of us just work out grocery day or something else in that day.
Mhm.
I don't think this is gonna be a problem.
Mhm.
I think that there's not gonna be that many extra attendees either way.
Right. The last comment, I forgot this part of what I said to you, is that I would think that we would get leadership from the county council for these 40 some odd advisory committees that are all struggling with the same situation about the emerging from COVID, if we really are in the first place.
Yeah. And
I do think that that's a good note. Like we are using someone else that's not a committee
Yep.
member's Zoom
Yep.
account to make this possible. So it's
Right.
almost like I would say like the monthly announcement should have an asterisk of like,
Yeah.
we will do our best to make Zoom available to people, but if Bill can't set that up for us, or his
That's right. I
company
agree with
decides
that.
to
Creating the appropriate
revoke that permission,
expectations.
yeah, then we have to look elsewhere. So I think that's kind of important to keep in mind too.
I would think it makes sense for all of the committee heads to maybe contact each other and start a process whereby we petition together, we petition the county council to at least provide some basic level of resources, i.e., should we be using our own email addresses for this, or should we get a email address from the county for doing county business? Should a Zoom account be set up for each committee and run through and just have some basic tech oversight from the county, since they are getting a fair amount of at least some work for free?
Or at least some level of guidance that says, we don't have the personnel or infrastructure to supply each committee with what it would take to make that public, but here are our guidelines, for what we should do.
Part of what he said, you have a dedicated email tied to this, right? Into that.
LIFAC,
So,
LIFAC email.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
so
what
we
about-
have that.
I'd like to come back to a couple of things, but I want to get, Bill had something and Jim had something.
Well, the thing I had was that when we were set up, it was like, they weren't gonna give us any money, any resource, anything. That we were on our own.
But my point is that the county has, and I think there's in the ballpark of 40 or 50 of these advisory committees that report to the county council, I believe, right? And they're all of these committees are having the same issues about it.
Oh, I don't know.
So,
Bill?
I just wanted to point out to Judy's earlier comment about the chat. We've already had Charles Bailey actually ask me to pass something on to Roland so that when his presentation comes up, he'll be able to cover something, to make it more efficient.
yeah,
But the other thing, Chris asked me to put together a quick presentation with just some of the options and some of the priorities, and we were planning on doing that next month after learning about this. So much of the conversation we'll be able to just learn from what was on this.
And I'd like to move along, but just to close this off, I didn't seem like business right now, but we had a few bumps getting our notice out and having our email addresses work correctly. And I've been talking with the county council office about that and have some help. Hopefully, I've been working with Jill, talking with Jill, and we kind of have some thoughts about a way to take this. I've learned a little bit, and maybe I wanted to talk with Reed and Judy after, if we have a minute, but I've learned a little bit more about other committees and how they're supported or not supported. And so, we need to temper our expectations, but we also should be able to learn, from some of the other communities and how they work or don't work. I think we're the only one who started an in-person move. And, maybe it's too early, but we made a decision about it. So,
to help perhaps in some of the discussion, there are advisory committees and then there are advisory committees to the county council. County council has several dozens of advisory committees. Many of those are required by law, and almost all of those have some sort of staff support, like the planning commission and the flood control zone district, the sub flood control zone district. Those are required. Your group was a volunteer group that was asked for by the community, and the council formed that. Mike, you might even have been there. And with that, there was an assumption that you would just meet, hold some minutes, and make your comment back to the council. The committee's charge and the committee's responsibility has grown over those years, and you're acting more of a autonomous type of committee with real action, as opposed to a group of people on the island who talk about the ferry. So it might be time to readdress your your ordinance that establishes really the level, which is why some of the other committees that were at your same level are no longer around now. The pandemic, Point Roberts hasn't met since, probably won't. I'm sure they'll fill. There are other committees that are real volunteer. They meet ad hoc, and those ad hoc might be 2.5 years in between. And some people forgot they were even on the committee when they got the notices, because I received phone calls talking about it. So just to let you know, if you have an expectation to call the council and have someone here taking notes or getting a Zoom account, I was with Rama when we tried that last year, and that didn't go anywhere at all. So.
And I wasn't even gonna suggest that. But I there may be some we may be able to get some advice or direction by working with the council office. And I actually proposed that 2 or 3 of us might meet with Jill one way or another to see, because she knows a lot about how, at least, she doesn't handle all the committees, but she does some. She has some perspective. Let's see, in this agenda item, we had the request. Bill mentioned the request to him for a presentation next month to, come back with maybe some concrete options that we can use today's experience, and that everybody has more experience with this than me. But we can revisit that and maybe identify, I think, the kind of stepwise approach to trying something and seeing if it works, seeing if it improves something, but maybe some things don't work out and we don't have to commit to them. I think the main thing is, I think, managing expectations for ourselves, but also for the people who want to participate. So that was that effort. These items under 1C, I did want to make a request to Roland. It's something we talked about at the last meeting, about having some kind of a presentation on the background. We have really a whole new committee, half new. And I think it would be really worthwhile for some of us. I need to refresh. The 3 of you haven't been on the committee at all. And so I wanted to ask Roland whether he could consider a presentation next meeting or maybe June. I don't want to overburden.
Well, May will be in dry dock, so it'll be June for me. I won't be taking the passenger ferry over.
You decided to do Zoom.
Or we went to Bellingham.
But moving right along.
But can that work in June? Or
In June, yeah, if you could send me an email asking me which topics you'd like me to cover.
Yeah.
And the time, because I can talk about the level of service in 5 minutes or 55 minutes. It's really up to you.
Oh, good, thanks. And what at least the preview is 3 items: the relationship between the county and the Nation, the lease, and the plans for flood events. And that's kind of this year's really brought that to the forefront. So that I'll do an email on that. And then also the 3rd request was to Rich, just about, and we talked about it last month, but just planning for a meeting at Civic Center for the budget and performance review. And we've been trying to do those annually. It seems like July, I put July on the agenda because that's the earliest possible.
Yeah, it is. I'll speak with Randy right now and see what his availability is with Gretchen.
He's still
Yeah, he's still out.
I would, and while we're on that, I would make a pitch, just again, maybe since I'm pretty new, of a tour of the, the operations, just a hands-on tour of, the walking chief, the two dry dock, or the two ferry terminals, and just a hands-on pointing out, so that when we do have a discussion about different stuff, that, we're all on the same page, we understand some of those operations, because my nautical background is about ships that go underwater on purpose, so we don't carry cars, so. If that's a possibility to
It
get
is.
something set up, whenever.
Yeah, and I don't know if that would work better for folks who would just individually need that experience like yourself, or if it's something that the whole group would like to do. The more folks we have, the tougher it's going to be.
Complicated.
Or quite honestly, I'm happy to meet with you individually or in pairs or whatever too. Just because I know all of our schedules are a little challenging, and also to sync up our schedules was also with like the sailing schedule, the boat and crew break times and all that business could get a little tricky. But
Keep
happy-
the subject
happy
in
to
mind.
do
I
it.
mean, I would just say to Todd that in the time I've been on the committee, I've been invited upstairs a few times, and that wasn't that wasn't a tour so much, but it was a little, getting the references, this is, we taste that way.
Yeah.
But also like all those other terms, what the hell's a dolphin? I look for the marine mammals.
I just wasn't sure about your schedule, if it would be easier for all of us to be there at one time, or.
Probably not. It might be, if you're really wishing to do that, what I would suggest is the next meeting that we have in June, you can just give me a call and I'll come meet you early before the meeting, and I can give you a tour.
Okay, sounds good.
No problem.
Well, we've put all the time, we've gone over our time limit quite capably, but not too far. So the big subjects, I think, for today are old business, new business, and old business has a bit of a footprint. And so I imagine there's a lot of interest in operations report and upcoming dry dock plans.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd like me, I can just jump right into that.
I'd like you to.
Okay, so we've just published a whole bunch of stuff online on our ferry website and Public Works, detailing a ton of information about dry dock. It's all there. However, what I'd like to do is just kind of go over the bullet points really quick, the really pertinent information as far as what's going to really affect the islanders the most. So I'll just start off by saying on May 5th, what it's going to look like is we're going to run a normal schedule that Thursday on May 5th, except for the last sailings on May 5th are going to be the 9 p.m. from Lundy Island and the 9:10 p.m. from Gooseberry Point. So that's it. And after that, no more walking chief. It's gone. So I just want to say that loud and clear. You got on May 5th, you got the 9 p.m. from Lundy Island and the 9:10 coming back to the island from Gooseberry Point. And then that's it. And then after that, the reason we're doing that is to give our crews time at night, because the tides are right at night to get the floats in. Also, what we want to do is achieve this changeover time on Thursday at night to be able to provide a ferry service on Friday morning, so people can get to work, kids can get to school, all that business. However, I would caveat that by saying if it's really terrible weather for some reason, it's blowing really hard, then the changeover will not happen at night. They won't be able to safely get that work accomplished, and that would mean it would have to happen at daylight, which would mean that would just basically mean worst case scenario, no ferry at all until they get the changeover accomplished, and that usually takes them a few hours. So, or more, maybe up to 4 hours. So, anyway, word of caution. We're hoping that doesn't happen. We're not planning for it, but it's just a warning shot.
What day is May 5th?
So Thursday, May 5th. Yep. 9, I'll say it again, 9 p.m. from Lunny Island and 9:10 p.m. from Gooseberry Point. And then normal passenger vessel service planned on the morning of Friday, May 6th.
Is that like a 6 a.m. plan start?
Yeah, 5, it's gonna be a 5. The passenger vessel, I believe, is 5:40 a.m. because it's a Friday. And then coming back, the changeover is gonna occur the Saturday morning of the 21st. So that means no ferry service at all on Saturday morning, the 21st, until the Walking Chief returns from dry dock. Sailing up obviously on the 21st morning, the 21st as well. And we expect to get the Walking Chief back up here, up and running and providing service late afternoon, early evening, depending on how everything goes. And so that's going to be a much more straightforward situation. One other thing to note is the parking situation on Gooseberry Point. Those handicap spots that we provide that are always just they're not a problem. They're a wonderful thing, but the problem is that opening those spaces up in a time that makes sense for folks that need them is always challenging if we've got capital work going on the Gooseberry Point terminal, because then we've got to put the ramps in place, and there has to be, so it takes up the ramp takes up a lot of real estate, and having to move all that equipment around. Oftentimes we're not able to open those handicap spaces up until after dry dock has already started. This year, we're going to be opening them up May 3rd, and they will remain open through the 23rd. So they're going to be opening up well in advance before dry dock, and they're still going to be open after the Walking Chief returns for several days, to give people a lot of opportunity to take advantage of those spaces without them being a burden. Although there's no capital work going on the Gooseberry Point terminal, there is going to be maintenance crews are going to be working on the timber structures of the trestle over there at Gooseberry Point terminal. So they're going to be doing some repair work, and that's our bridge crew. So please, just take caution and be aware when you're walking up and down the trestle during the passenger vessels. There's construction crews around it, and then we're going to make it really safe. Everybody's going to be keeping an eye on everything, but also keep an eye on yourself. And then last but not least, dry dock. You can expect dry dock to happen next year at the same time, May/June timeframe, because we're not going to come out again in September, right? So that means we're going a full year to May and June. We're going to be doing it again next year, May/June, late May, early June, somewhere in there. And after all that has taken place, there'll be a time to discuss sort of the positives and negatives of the May dry dock versus.
Are you saying you will be pulling it out next year?
Correct. Okay, yeah. Also, just really quick, I can't remember if I brought this up at the last meeting or not, but we did hire a couple of new relief deckhands. It will be benefited positions. It's Kelsey McLean and Annie Justice are both new benefited crew members on board Walking Chief. So that's all I have. You guys have any questions about? Oh, and by the way, like I said earlier, tons of information online on the county website. And please, if anybody in the community or any of you have any questions about, especially about dry dock, please feel free to email the ferry email, and I see all of those. So.
It's really big in the news right now about the reduction in force on the state ferries and the crews. So I'm just curious how you found hiring, capable deckhands. Was it a challenge to find people, or were you pretty easily to hire?
We're doing pretty well, actually. In fact, we're going out for a round of on-call hiring to fill these spots that we just filled, and we got a few really strong applicants. So for whatever reason, we're a desirable place to work, I guess. So
You have a good local farm team.
We do. Good local farm team on the island. Proud of them, we are.
Well, they
Sure.
have to live on the island too, so it's a different pool, it's
Oh,
always
okay.
different, you know.
Well, the other thing is, for a lot of people, it's a godsend, because otherwise now they're scraping by. It really, you know,
We just forced the crew members to live on Lummi Island. That's why we're so
okay,
successful.
they're already here.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Is there anything of note on outages that have been, I mean, you go to the website.
Sorry, great
There's a
question.
lot.
I'm really focused on dry dock this week. There is going to be a maintenance outage on the 20th. Just a regular dock maintenance outage just to ensure the docks are in really good working order leading up to dry dock. So on the 20th, there's going to be an outage. Regular time, and it actually, unfortunately, it coincided with an early release day for Ferndale School District. So we will be running a 1 noon ferry, a 12 p.m. sailing from Lummi Island, 12:10 p.m. sailing from Gooseberry Point to provide service for foot traffic only, primarily for the school kids. So, thank you.
Mary has one question from the audience. And you guys tell me whether this works or not, but she asked, will masks be required inside the passenger ferry?
That's a great question. It is on the website, and the answer to that question is because we are transportation. Yes, we will be requiring masks. However, we are also not enforcement. So the ferry crew will not be enforcing mask wearing, but it is required. I hope that makes sense.
Rich, is there gonna be any work on the outside?
No work on the outside. Sure.
Moving on then, so Roland has a series of things to talk about.
You remind me, I don't have a copy of the agenda.
Yeah,
actually, so
sorry.
you can just,
So it's the number 1, status of raise grant application, 2, status of crab grant application, 3, the status and plans for the 5.3 million in the move ahead Washington.
okay. Raise grant was submitted yesterday, and we got our notice that it was received, and we have our application number in hand. I've asked our communications folks to update the website. So that would be under Public Works Ferry Grant, I think, or new vessel. And where it was the 2021 raise grant, the 2022 will be on there instead. In addition, I've asked them to add the 9 appendixes to that as well. So if you are having difficulty sleeping and you need something to help lull you into a nice slumber, you can read all 9 appendix. And I think there's probably 600 or 700 pages there of information, including the benefit cost analysis. We took a different turn this time. We talked to Department of Transportation and said this is it's a bridge, no bridge situation. The chief is experiencing enough outages now that if we don't build this boat, there could be a time when Rich sends out a notice and says, we'll be back when we can, and we'll let you know as soon as we can get something to you. That is something that we are doing everything we can with our mechanics and crew and Rich and his crew to make sure that that never happens. But it's still a reality in a situation when a boat that had a 50-year life expectancy is turning 60 next month, or this month, end of this month, I guess, really, depending on what date you go with. So we utilize that. We as in KPFF and Carly Sawyer, financial consultant, went through and looked at other benefit cost analysis that went for raise grants on bridges. And they calculated the expected downfall in property values when you become completely landlocked. So we went from a cost benefit of 0.57 in our previous applications, meaning the benefit was only half of the cost, to a 37 point something benefit cost. So the benefit is 37 times the cost of the vessel. A significant change, because when you start adding up the loss of jobs, loss of property values throughout all of northern and all of Loving Island, it adds up quite a bit. And it's not a dog and pony show. We utilized the same calculations that other bridge applicants used in theirs, and it went through. We did the same thing. We had it checked by several different people, and that is what was submitted. And that should be on the website in the next couple of days. Unfortunately, we're losing Marie, who's our social media person. She's going over to the health department. And so we're actively trying to get her replaced. And I don't know if we can actually replace Marie, from my opinion, but we're going to do our best. So give us a little bit of time with Randy out and 2 or 3 other administrative people out. I've gotten my request in the queue to get that website updated, but hopefully you'll see that here in the next few days, or certainly into next week. We'll have it. So you'll have the entire application and all the appendices available. Yes, sir.
Did we ask for 30 mil instead of 20?
25 is the maximum ask. We asked for 25. The CRAB, the County Road Administration Board, known as CRAB, has a program available to the 4 counties that have their own ferries. The other 3 have taken advantage of this program. We're the last to ask, and we are in this 4-year cycle. So we'll be coming up on year 3 of the 4-year cycle. The first year we completed the level of service, went through, had that adopted by resolution, did the design of the boat, did all the things that we needed to do, went to the technical review committee of CRAB. They've reviewed it. They have some issue with regard to the county not having a ferry district and other funding. We are responding to that. And on the side, the County Road Administration Board provides a recommendation at their summer meeting this year. That recommendation then goes to the legislature as becomes part of the Department of Transportation's budget. We're asking for the full 10 million that's available. It's a $10 million program, not a grant. And so what that $10 million is 500,000 over 20 years. So we borrow money up front. We could borrow 10 million, that 500,000 would be used to pay back at least $10 million of it. Today, Elizabeth Cosa and I met with Senator Sefcik, State Senator Sefcik, and talked to him about watching out next year for whatever CRAB sends their way. And if it's anything less than 10 million, would he please push hard to kick it on up to 10 million? So CRAB can monkey with it all they want. I decided to go around and go straight to the legislature because they're the ones making the votes and they're the ones doing it. So we are proceeding with educating those people involved on the importance of this new vessel, the critical need, and the time and effort on the RAISE grant is being very useful for that effort. In doing that, Senator Sefcik, as well as Alicia Rule and Schumacher, were all very helpful in getting $5.3 million added to the Move Ahead Washington, I think that's what it's called, transportation bill, which is now signed by the governor, as part of the budget. That was something that the late Doug Erickson put forward, and his previous staff brought it forward, and kind of in recognition of Doug's effort to get some additional money, it just sailed right through. I didn't have to do any lobbying or cajoling or threatening or scolding or anything. That money kind of flowed right through. And I'm old enough to remember when $5.3 million was a really lot of money. So that's a lot of money from the state legislature. And one of the questions, I believe, is what are the plans for that? Well, all money has strings attached. Grant monies have steel cables attached. So first of all, it has been approved, it's signed, it's in the budget. The budget begins on July 1st, 2022. That money technically is available. Well, it's available from the Office of Financial Management to go towards Department of Transportation, who will then put it into a program, who will then write up a grant, who will then write up a grant agreement, who will then contact Whatcom County when it's available. The money is not available to Whatcom County on July. Did I say that loud enough? Did everyone hear? The Whatcom County is not available. That money is not available to Whatcom County yet. It's coming to us. We are keeping track of expenditures. Some of the plans that we are going to put into the agreement with Department of Transportation. And I believe it was Charles, the one that asked the question. I don't know if he was. Well, Charles, some of that money will go towards the alternatives analysis and pre-design or preliminary engineering for electrification infrastructure, so that we can get closer and move forward and really kind of see, instead of a couple of people walking around guessing whether or not a new substation is, actually going through and saying, okay, this is what's needed, this is how big it needs to be, and how many cables do we need to go from Harbor Freight to get across to the island, and that was a joke. It's a joke. But what will it take to get the terminals? Because the actual connection, there's a couple of different ways.
Yeah.
And part of it has to be what our availability of our own mechanics. Are there some that we can work on, or does everything have to be done by electrician, all that stuff? So that has to be taken into consideration. What we're trying to make it is as reliable as possible and not to be a problem for the crew in any way. And so that'll be set up for that electrification. Besides that work, we want to do as much or all of the Gooseberry terminal work with that 5.3 million. And the reason for that is
Hello?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I lost a credit card on the road somewhere. No one picks anything up from here to here.
Sorry.
Nope.
Okay, just checking. Thank you.
Gooseberry terminal, as you all know, is within the Lummi Nation. The Lummi Nation has a treaty, a tribal employment requirement ordinance, meaning that any work that's done on the Lummi Nation requires us to hire a certain number of Lummi Nation people, as well as provide monies towards their training programs and that sort of thing. We can spend local money doing that. We can spend state money doing that. We cannot spend any federal money because that is a violation of equal rights. So federal money cannot be used. It's a violation of Title VI on the Lummi Nation. So what we're doing is utilizing that 5.3 onto Gooseberry, so we're not having to use complete local funds for that. Which was quite frankly, an amazing thing because it will pay for a tremendous amount of the terminal, the actual work. So we have started the permit process on the terminal, started the process. We're filling out all the applications, making contacts with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Corps of Engineers, our own Whatcom County crew, the shoreline program, and the like, and getting that up and running, figuring out if we can do a categorical exclusion under NEPA or might have to do a full environmental assessment. We'll see. Part of that has to do with the Orca situation, but the terminal itself doesn't make noise, and it's not, so it shouldn't be a problem, but we still have to go through the whole process. As well as you all have found out just for this meeting, not all of the agencies are fully back in full operation either. Some are still working from home, very difficult to call people. You can't stop by and see them in the office and drop off stuff and just kind of chat with them. So things take a lot longer than they used to, and they took plenty long previous to that. So we're getting a head start on that. We have been told that the money we were spending, we keep track of it as part of this project, can be part of that 5.3. So we're going to try to get a running start at spending that money.
Even work that happens before July 1st?
Well, that's what we're working on.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get some phone calls back and we'll figure that out. It won't matter if we're working before July 1st or after July 1st. There's so much that needs to happen beforehand. So that is the financial situation. If you have any other questions, feel free to give me a call.
I'd just like, if possible for you to know this, or at least how I can obtain an update on the amount that's been raised through the surcharge. I'd like to inform our public about that, but also the letter writing campaign talking point.
Yeah.
To be able to, what do you call it? We're checking it.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't have that number available. In fact, my eyeballs just glanced across that information probably 2 weeks ago, but I can't tell you what it is. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I can find out.
And at the very least, we'll want to review that at the budget reform.
Yeah.
With the 5.3, were you able to specifically reference that in the base application? So
Yes.
that became another source.
It did, and even several of, if not all, of the District 40 and District 42 representatives and senators referenced the fact that the state has already invested $5.3 million that is signed by the governor. We have the acceptance or the notification letter by Department of Transportation. Congratulations, you got $5.3 million. We'll let you know. Don't call us, we'll call you when it's available letter.
That kind of goes in my middle category of the raise, or USDOT doesn't like to be the first in.
Correct.
So that's been helpful.
Whatcom County is also looking at the remainder being under a bond, and that was put in the application. So we're essentially telling the US DOT they're last in. We're ready to go. Send us the grant and we can bill.
Is that the same 5 million or just a different 5 million from the 5 million that the governor promised Charles on the Zoom call?
I would think that would be the 5.3 that we haven't heard any additional monies out there.
Is the
One moment.
is the money that the Lummi Nation requires on projects on their property, is that a certain percentage? Is that, how did they base that?
It's extremely complicated. because it seems to change.
Okay.
We have a couple of different people who have gone through with it, through the whole process. And what we have found out is we budget a certain amount, but it never goes to the council for the ask until we have met with the Terrell officer who has changed yet again. And that person gives us a letter saying, this is what we want before we allow you to do that project. So it's an ordinance, but it's kind of guidelines, which is a little different than the laws we're under. And so there are I'm not saying they're capricious, but they have
There's flexibility.
there's tremendous flexibility depending on their perception of need. Like if it's just in their way and they're not getting anything out of it and we're just rolling over on their property and like, you know, that's gonna take a long time before it gets any approval, if at all. Whereas things that are partnered, we've had those conversations be done in half an hour. This is great, let's do it, you know, here, you know, and done. So it is a negotiation. And we haven't started that yet because we don't have the plans in hand. We don't have the permits or anything else. So until we've got permits, they really don't want to waste their time on a perhaps project.
I was mainly wondering because the state put up $2 million for the new fire station there at the point. So I was just wondering how that might play out. So.
It's a fire station. I would imagine it's a mutual benefit.
And speaking of that, while we're on there, what is the weight limit for a vehicle on the ferry?
For mutual aid,
Yeah,
50,000 pounds. And
50,000.
yeah,
okay.
and our departments have come up with a plan on how to handle all that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
That's currently, right?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions from the committee? Bill, I am interested if anyone else remotely has questions. I was thinking maybe Dave has paid a lot of attention to the raise grant, and so is Charles.
Yeah, no one's chatted with me so far.
Okay.
If there are, you can certainly, Dave, you're good, look like? Okay.
Okay, let's see, the next item on the agenda that I have is liaison day update on the dock committee. Mike, I don't know if there's anything.
I got a great visit with back to Chris today, who's heading as chair of this initiative. And I'll summarize it with some of his words. It's moving up the chain to the county executive and John Hutchins, but there's no expectation that will move rapidly because of current circumstances created by the flooding. Parks and Rec, they made a successful presentation to Parks and Rec with that citizens committee. And he said Parks is ready to move ahead. However, there's going to be a changing of the guard there. They lost their leader and they're looking to hire a new leader. And my report was it'll be a slow burn, but it's encouraging.
Okay, thanks. And then on to public awareness, we kind of have rolled the tone deadline over on these agendas. Reed, I think last month you did a tone article, and I presume.
Yeah, I was getting before the deadline.
Deadline is moved up to Thursday because Paul's going to be out of town.
Oh, okay. So tomorrow.
Thanks
So
for
that's
doing
correct.
that.
Yeah,
Got it written right here.
Well, it's just really
Thanks for
good to
doing
have
that.
that. Mike, on the legislators' letter and phone campaign,
I need time with you at some point. Do you have lunch?
I have it for a couple of weeks, actually. So The best, I'm out the next few days away from my desk, so.
So I need to finalize a couple of things with you, make sure you're
Sure.
saying the right thing. I spoke again today to at length with Alan Crum, who heads the Island LIFAC community website. He's been out of sync for a month, including extended hospital stay, so that's why nothing's appeared yet. And I will send around my email. We're going to basically revise the one that we did, except I took a couple of notes here tonight that will strengthen those letters. And you'll see it before it gets posted, but he told me we can get it posted post haste. Question I have of you is, you said a summer meeting for CRAB. Do we know when that is?
Yeah, Liz or Jim Karcher would have that information.
Email Liz.
Yeah. I just got handed 2 more projects, so I'm trying to stay away from other people's work. So just check those
Yeah,
out.
and the only reinforcement from tonight about asking specific stuff is there a campaign now for the base grant this early, or is it better later?
Better later.
Grab now,
Yes.
and that's the 3 delegates from that cover our
I would go with all 6 because we got all, that would be District 40 and District 42 all submitted letters of support for the ferry. Even though you're in 42, but District 40 is part of Bellingham, and many folks here work in Bellingham.
So
So
6 of them, okay.
Yep.
Okay, so that, yeah. Raise later, grab next up. I was trying to make sure we had at least our letters of support for the raise. So that's taken care of. Okay, and I just left this other outreach opportunities on there.
I think it's good to leave it on the agenda.
Yeah,
I don't think anything's going on right now.
Okay.
Before we leave old business, Charles did come back with one more question for you.
Oh, good.
Will you use any part of the 5.3 million for purchasing the electrical infrastructure onshore and on the boat needed for it to start service as an electrical vessel?
we might. Some of that is it kind of determines as to what mitigation we might have for Gooseberry Terminal, moving of the dolphins and there's no breakwater, but the moving of the dolphins and doing that sort of thing. If there's little to no mitigation, then we'll have more money to spend towards electrification.
Anything back from anyone on that?
No.
And if you have more questions, I won't be in the rest of the week, but next week, give me a call or whatever, we can talk about it.
Okay, and the last item on the agenda is the new business, and Rich has put together PowerPoints or slide show. I skimmed it. I honestly didn't have time to give it the attention it needs, but we talked earlier today. Rich thought he could at least get this as introduction.
Okay, so this comes out of discussions I've had with a lot of people on the island, including much people on this committee, about a number of concerns that since the decision was made to go with this 34 cargo, we've all seen evidence all over the planet increasing damages and pressures for climate change. And the state government, the governor, the national government, Department of Transportation, and at least some people in the county and the sort of mission statement of the county about trying to limit climate impact of the various infrastructure projects that we do in the county. It strikes me that we have chosen, first of all, we're presented with 3 different options for those. A 20-car ferry, which would in fact be better than the chief, because it would probably reliably carry 20-car ferry. And then there's nothing between a 20 and a 28. And then there was a 34. The 28 was rejected for various reasons. So really there was only one option. There's one option presented to us. And I had done some work earlier, and I followed up on that work by going over the numbers that were presented to us and calculating, well, what would it be like if we could use the same map that they used to look at the smaller vessels that they did not consider. And without going into, you can look at the presentation for the details. So basically, I added some numbers to the original table and added a 22-car vessel, a 24-car vessel, 26-car vessel, and computed the various numbers for those vessels. And so that's kind of item one.
Rich, if you could speak up, Mary's having problems hearing you.
So to summarize that piece of it, the options that were presented 4 or 5 years ago were extremely limited. Number 2, much of the discussion had actually led to the selection of the 34-car vessel were based on demand projections that were like demand projections have been done forever. The assumption that the future is going to be pretty much like the past. What we now know from climate change that we've seen is the future is not going to be anything like the past. All of those projections are shots in the dark based upon what we see coming ahead of us. We also know that even though county and public works have mandates and goals to limit carbon emissions with county infrastructure projects, this particular project had no consideration whatsoever for climate impacts. And it was sometime later that with some prodding, they were able to come up with a sort of makeshift hybrid project, even though it wasn't designed that way from the beginning. And then finally, even with limited options that were presented, there were no specific metrics to determine what it was that were criteria for picking any particular vessel. It was mostly based on discussions about sometime 30 or 40 years from now, on a Friday afternoon, what kind of traffic there might be based on certain assumptions about the economy and about the future. All of that led me to believe that, okay, let's take another look and see if there's a way to create a vessel that will do, as the chief, 3 runs in an hour. And the big difference that that makes is that, I gave an example in the slideshow. Because of the short distance that the Watcom Chief travels, any time saved, or any number of vessels, or any number of vehicles added to make the vessel's capacity is pretty much used up in the loading and offloading portion of the trip. Example, if space out. The walking chief making 3 runs an hour, that's 20-minute turnaround. Can sometimes make 60 cars an hour. The new 20 car vessel with the wider lanes, the different layouts, the streamlined on and off process could certainly regularly make 20-minute turnarounds. The question is, are there things you can do with a 22-car boat, a 24-car boat, a 26-car boat to narrow that down? What's the largest boat? What's the largest capacity you can create with design work aimed at accomplishing it to carry the most cars that could be, that allow a vessel to make pretty regularly 3 runs an hour. We also know that the numbers that KPFF developed were based on the assumption that the ferry would be carrying, when they were considering maximum loads, they assumed the case where you had peak loads going in both directions. That never happens on this ferry.
Wait, what never happens?
Peak loads going, full boats going in both directions at the same time.
That's false. That does happen all the time.
It does.
All the time. Well, we got full, you're just to be
So
clear.
so
you're saying,
in
so
the
what you're
in the mornings, I think it does happen.
Folks,
So
I
for
need
just a
to-
short period of
Yeah.
time.
I need to give a time one
Yeah.
that we're at
Okay.
7:30.
Okay, so that may be wrong.
Yeah, I understand why you would have that perception, but that's.
So this is based on data that was collected back in 2016 and 2017 that's included in the reports online that that the guys were writing down the full loads, not full loads. Definitely showed peaks on morning traffic off the island, peaks on afternoon traffic to the island. So
The peaks are correct. It's the midday and on either side of the peaks. If you're riding the boat, you'll see that it's plugged both directions often, especially about 6 months out of the year. In the wintertime, when there's not much happening on Lummi Island, that situation changes a little bit. We're able to maintain a schedule and we're able to at times do the 3 trips.
there are definitely seasonal variations in the summertime.
Big ones. Yeah.
And summertime is when the biggest peak demands happen, and that's when the biggest crunch happens. So that's when you need the most cars per hour.
Correct.
And again, what happens if you crunch the numbers is that if you could get even 22 cars on a round trip and still do it in a 20-minute turnaround, you could do 66 cars an hour for a lot less capital and operating cost and carbon impact than a 34-car vessel making 2 runs an hour would only carry 68. If you can make 24, which seems like the magic number, if you could design a boat to get 24 cars in the peak direction 3 times an hour, you get to 72. If you go to 26 or 28, then you start getting crunched with that time limit, and it's very difficult to do that because you're also adding loading and unloading time. So the bottom line here, not to push this too far, is that because of our, I'm not sure how many of you feel this way. I certainly feel this way, that we have a moral responsibility to limit the climate footprint of this operation. And if, as the numbers show, the smallest vessel we could do 3 cars, or 3 runs an hour, performs as well as a 34-car boat in terms of the cars and vehicles it's delivering, then why in the world would we pay the kind of money we're paying both and the kind of climate impacts we're getting with a larger boat? So you can look at the numbers, you may or may not agree with them, but going back to the the issue that I was going to mention before, is that if you could carry roughly 60 cars an hour in a peak direction on a run like from the island to East Point. If you had to make that same run to Bellingham, it would take what, an hour round trip? 2 hour round trip?
Hour and a half.
Hmm?
2 hour and a half to 2.
With the walking cheap, it's 1 hour, one direction.
Right. So if it's
On a really nice
so if it's
day.
2 hours to move, if it's 2 hours to move the same number of vessels, the same number of cars, you would have to have 120 car capacity. The point being, short runs favor a small vessel making more runs. Long distances require larger vessels carrying more vehicles. That's just the way the math works out. We are right on the edge. So if you start increasing, once you get to a point where you can't do 3 runs an hour, then making a bigger boat, using a bigger boat takes away as much time as it adds. And so the bizarre thing is that the increments going from 20, 22, 24 actually add cars per hour under reasonable assumptions. After that, the extra time and the fact that you can't make 3 runs in an hour starts decreasing the ability of those vehicles to deliver. That's why a 34-car boat can at best do 68 cars.
Excuse me,
And that's,
we're reaching our.
okay, and anyway, so that's the metric that I kind of talk about there. And so what my ask here is not that we immediately change the boat we're getting, but I do think that we should find someone more reliable than I am to check those numbers and to ask, can we get a boat that will carry 24 cars an hour that will work for us? Because that would be better in every single respect, including climate, than the present plan.
We need to wrap it up after a couple of comments, Todd and then Jim.
Sure, I would say this is interesting ideas. I think I would point out, I don't know if it's a straight line extrapolation. I'd be interested to look at the numbers from KPFF and then also how you did your extrapolation, because I think, and Rich can correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of times resistance and power can either be logarithmic or exponential in their functions, especially as you're dealing with hydraulic resistance. And so it may favor yours more, or it may favor a bigger vessel more. Yeah, exactly. Depending on the length of the vessel and all that type of stuff.
It's a question of surface
Right, which, but the resistance can
We
be,
need
and speed
to
can be.
not get too
Anyhow.
deep into these.
Anyhow,
Right.
I think it's interesting. I think it's worth taking a look at.
That's all I'm asking.
Yep,
And
thanks.
yeah, we'll have a chance to read in more depth. I couldn't even look at it.
No, I get it.
My comment, a closing comment perhaps, is that we can all take a look at this, study it if we are inclined to do so. But my feeling is that we're not boat designers, and we hired someone to collect that data and study that. And I think that if we determine that these concerns are valid enough, that we go back to KPFF and we say, we have some concerns, we'd like this data to be reviewed and presented to us again. That, I think that's our role, not trying to determine
I
hydro.
think that would be fine, but I would go to a separate consultant.
And I guess just to add to that too, is, I mean, this, we've been at this for how many years, and KPFF issued that boat design roughly how many years ago now?
4 or 5.
4 or 5,
Yeah.
something like that. So, I mean, even before you go to build a boat, I would think that it would be prudent to say enough time has gone by that this needs to be updated and reviewed. Seems like that would be the normal route. But I agree with Chris. I don't think that we should all try to sit at this table and be engineers because we're not.
Well,
And that's
I am.
not our job, but that's not our job
And
on this committee.
So am I.
Yeah, but again, I reiterate, that's not our job on this committee. Our job is to make recommendations.
Well-
And if you are an engineer and you see something, then yes, bring it. But
And before the build is commissioned, I'm sure there will be an opportunity to register concerns at that point. Jim has a comment, but we're trying to fund a vote to build.
yeah,
And the issue to me seems to be getting the funds at this point.
If I may, just
Yes, Jim, and then and then we need to adjourn.
Okay, in the case of the larger boat, the larger boat is definitely favored hydromatic efficiency of a properly designed hull will be much better than the short boat. Second thing, we've got wear and tear, and there's no possible way you can consistently get 3 runs in. All it takes is one glitch, and you're done. In the report of 2007, and I can keep going on here, that the consultant.
No, we can't.
The consultant said the maximum of 24 ferries to control.
all right, Roland, I think you're closing us out.
Well, it was the idea that it is 60 cars per hour at 3 runs is only during peak, and that's only for a couple hours. Otherwise, you're taking all of the breaks and lunches from the crew. We are 1 order away from going to the schedule, and you won't see 3 per hour, period. The only reason why it's doing it is because the crew are your neighbors, and they are volunteering themselves to run the extra runs. And so that's something to keep in mind. So the other thing is, if you want to move forward, you being LIFAC, and want to move forward to have this addressed, you would need to do someone other than KPFF, because very similar presentation was made. We asked KPFF to look into it. They came back, explained why, as Jim was saying, the 34 car is actually the 37 car is the most efficient for moving vehicles. But you get into that wiggle room, or not wiggle, you get into the gray area of whether or not the Coast Guard is required a 4th person, 3rd person, whatever it was,
Yeah,
additional
that we
person.
spent some time on that.
So then we dropped it back from 37, which was the peak movement, to down to 34, which was in the safe zone for the Coast Guard. Also, the 34 just barely got you to the level of service that the community and LIFAC said was 2 sailings or 40 minutes or whatever that waiting time was.
2 boat wait.
2 boat wait. So I am not disagreeing with you, sir, but if you're gonna have it looked, you should want to have it from someone else, because KPFF has already been paid to look at that very scenario, and they came back with what they have. So a third party would be, otherwise you're just gonna get charged for something they've already done, which my job is to make sure we're not overspending money, and I don't want to do that.
I move we adjourn.
One second.
All in favor? Aye. But thanks for the time spent on